Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Mr. V. As you can see, I'm going for a slightly more casual look this morning. Okay, and here I'm ready to do some stuff on PPFs, production possibility frontiers, or if we're doing the IB, you'd see this in the spec as PPCs, production possibility curves. Okay, it's come up just because of the stuff that I'm doing with the lower sixth A level at the moment. We're starting to do comparative advantage, and there's a couple of things just that I think some people felt that I needed some revision on PPFs. So you know the score by now with Coffee Mr. V. Go and grab a coffee or whatever your favorite liquid is, put it in a mug, a glass or a cup, and then come back with me and we're going to do the synchronized sip, and that is going to be the best part of your lockdown day. So here we go, 1, 2, 3. I love coffee. So, production possibility frontiers. You should remember this, or a lot of it, from basically week 1 economics. The way I teach any economics courses, this is the first model that I like to do with you. One, because there's a nice game that we can play with chains and aeroplanes that helps build a PPF. But also I think it gets across the idea of opportunity cost quite well. And I consider opportunity cost as the kind of main central focus of economic study. Economics for me is a study of alternatives. What else could we have done with our money? What else could we have done with our resources? And the PPF is a good starting point for that. So let's take a country, for example, let's call it Georgeland. And in Georgeland, they only make 2 things. Okay, they like to make bananas, and I don't know, let's choose something else. An iPhone. Okay, so they make bananas and phones. So in Georgeland, then, if you put all of your resources, and by resources, remember, we mean capital, labor, and land. Capital, labor, and land. If we put all our resources into bananas, then maybe we can make, I don't know, 200 bananas. If, on the other hand, we put all of our resources into making phones, again, all our resources. Resources, by the way, and is just another word for factors of production. So sometimes in specs or textbooks, you'll see the word factors of production. It means resources. Okay, same thing. If we put all our resources into phones, maybe we can make, I don't know, 50 phones. Okay, not a very big country, Georgeland. All right. And the reason that we cannot make 200 bananas and 50 phones is that simply we don't have enough resources. We can either make 200 bananas and no phones, or 50 phones and no bananas, but we can't make that combination because we simply don't have the resources. Now, really, the reason that this revision video has come about is that in doing comparative advantage in year 13, one of the things that we did is we drew a straight line PPF. But we spent most of the first and second week of economics telling you that PPFs are not straight, and in fact, they are curved like that. And I just wanted to go through the reasons why they are actually curved. Okay, and the reason that they are, but I need to give it a firmer explanation, is that resources, those resources that we've just been talking about, the capital, labor, and land resources, are not perfectly substitutable. Okay, resources are not perfectly substitutable, not in the real world. Now, what does that phrase mean? Okay. Well, let's just take a unit of labor, a worker, all right? That's a resource, but we're taking that as on our example. Well, in the real world, not every worker is equally good at making bananas as they are at making phones. And some people, for example, are much better at making bananas, and other people will be much better at making phones. Now, you can obviously extend that to machinery and land as well. So some machines will be better, more effective at making bananas, whereas other machines will be much better at making phones. And similarly with the land, some land is really, really good for banana building, and others is just rubbish. Yeah, for example, beaches. Yeah, you won't get much in the way of bananas from cultivating a beach. So that's what that means. Okay, you can't just substitute one worker for another worker because they might have different strengths and weaknesses. You can't just substitute one machinery for another because they might have different strengths and weaknesses. So as we go from banana production to phone production, you can't assume that those resources will be equally good as the resources that you are kind of exchanging. And why is it curved then? All right, so we've got the idea, we can visualize it, but why is it curved? All right, well, let's give ourselves this position here that we're all busy making bananas. Yeah, everybody is fully specialized. All resources are in banana making. We're making 200 bananas. And then this is a command economy. The dictator of this economy decides, well, I want a quarter of my resources going into phones. Okay, so we are now reallocating from that point to somewhere around here. Okay, we're going from point A to point B. Okay, what do we notice? Well, in this instance, we gave away very few bananas. We sacrificed very few bananas for quite a large gain of phones. Now, I'm only going to give some kind of numbers here to illustrate the point, but the numbers themselves are not really the actual specific number themselves are not the point. It's more the idea that's the important. So I don't know, maybe we're gaining 25 phones, but we're only giving up, 20 bananas. Yeah, so there's a relatively small change there for a large change there. Now, why has that happened? Well, if you think about it in the real world, what would you do if you had all your resources making bananas and then the dictator said, no, a quarter of your resources need to go into making phones? Well, you take your best phone makers, wouldn't you? You take the people who are the best phone makers and the worst banana growers, okay, away from bananas into phones. You'd also take your best phone machinery, the machinery that's best at making phones would go first, and the worst and the worst banana machinery would go first as well, because it wouldn't giving you anything towards bananas. And that way you get this huge increase in phones because you've got your best resources making phones now. It's giving you that huge increase, but you also haven't lost very many bananas because you only gave away the worst banana workers and the worst banana machinery. Let's say then that the dictator comes around again and decides that another 25% has got to go. Okay, so we're reallocating again, this time from B to C. Okay, well, this time you'll see that we've only gained a smaller amount of phones. Okay, maybe we've gone from 25 to 40, so we've increased by 15, whereas we had increased by 25 before. And instead of losing 20 phones, we've actually lost quite a bit more this time. So maybe we've gone from 180 happened. Well, again, it's because these resources are not perfectly substitutable. Now, it's not quite the worst. It's not quite the best phone workers now, but it's the second best phone makers, and it's the second best phone machinery that's now being pulled over. And as a result, it's not quite the worst banana growth. So you're losing a lot more bananas and you're gaining slightly fewer phones because of the differences in the resources. Remember, this is the second best phone machinery, and it's the second worst banana machinery. And if you do it again, if you go another 25% to point D, you'll notice that we're only gaining very, very few phones now. In fact, it's something like only about 8 phones, but we're losing an awful lot. And if we did it again, we would only get from D to E, we would gain even fewer phones, probably only 1 or 2 at that point, and we'd lose a whole lot more bananas. So that's why the PPF is drawn as a curve, because of this resources not being perfectly substitutable. Basically, there is an increasing opportunity cost. As we have shifted our resources away from bananas and towards phones, as we have reallocated towards phones, the number of bananas that we are giving up at each stage is increasing. There is increasing opportunity cost of reallocating resources towards one product, in this case, phones. And that's because resources are not perfectly substitutable, and there is the maths to prove it. Now, let's just kind of assume, as David Ricardo did, that resources were perfectly substitutable. So we can still have the same x and y intercepts, but now instead of a curve, it's a straight line. Well, that would mean that for every kind of every 40 bananas that we're giving up, so we'd go from 200 to 160, we would gain 10 phones, because there is a ratio here of 5 to 1. No, 4 to 1. Okay, 4 bananas to 1 phone. So for every phone that we produce, we would be giving up 4 bananas, and that is constant. That's the line is constant there. Okay, the line is flat, so there wouldn't be increasing opportunity cost. There would be a constant opportunity cost. What would that mean about resources? It would mean that resources are perfectly substitutable. Okay, that actually every worker had an equal strength and or weakness in bananas or phones. Now, that's not to say they produce at a 1-to-1 ratio. They don't. They produce at a 4-to-1 ratio, 4 bananas to every phone. But every worker would be able to meet that ratio, and all units of land would be able to meet that ratio. Okay, so I would say that that isn't realistic. Yeah, but nevertheless, it can be an assumption that you make in order to kind of extend your theory about comparative advantage, which David Ricardo did. But in real life, probably this idea that resources are not perfectly substitutable, and hence the PPF is curved, is probably more realistic. Okay, hopefully that answers the questions that came up today. But if there are more questions, then obviously just don't hesitate and email me and I can answer them. Okay, thanks for coming along, and I will see you next time.